Hi, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, and I am here with none other than G-Man. Right, G-Man? G-Man's here, too.
How's everybody doing today? We're going to have some fun today with Matt Dillahunty again.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. So we're gonna have a what we're gonna do today is in fact we're gonna be doing this at 4 o'clock on Sunday for a while until we get bored of doing it. But right now we're doing this rotating our channels. So this week we're on my channel, next week we'll be on G-Man's channel, and last week we were on G-Man's channel. And I'm just switching up. So next week we're going to be back on G-Man's channel, and we're going to be featuring a lot of different reviews. And so what we're going to talk about today is a review of a call-in. We might even do more than one call-in, but we at least have one call-in from a 12-year-old who gave Matt Dillahunty a run for the money. So, G-Man, what do you think of that?
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think he gave him a little bit more than a run for his money. I think this is one of the more embarrassing calls that Matt Dillahunty has had to deal with.
I mean, it's not like we're looking for embarrassing calls, but I mean, if they fall in our lap, what are we to do, right?
Yeah, we got to review them and look at them, you know?
I mean, it's the least we could do.
I mean, it's a 12-year-old kid. We're talking about a 12-year-old kid. Matt Dillahunty should have no problem with a little child, you know?
Exactly. It's a 12-year-old. So we're giving him the advantage here. So I'm switching up screens to get this to I'm going to put that on the screen right now. Here we go. Okay, so now you and I are appearing in front of the Atheist Experience. Oops, I got my comments here. And here is the channel. Oh boy. We got a little smile.
Atheist community of Austin.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, double checking I got the sound going here. Okay, so without further ado, G-Man and I are going to be reviewing Matt Dillahunty. And we should probably talk about why we're reviewing Matt Dillahunty. Because last week, or I should say, I think it was 3 years ago, I got on Matt Dillahunty's channel and we reviewed that and on G-Man's channel last week. And we got a lot of giggles out of that. And then we also reviewed one of G-Man's calls into Matt Dillahunty. So both G-Man and I are guilty of calling Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience. And so both of us have listened to other people when they call. And this little 12-year-old, he probably did a better job than both of us, right? I mean, he did a really good job.
Oh, I know he did.
Yeah, I mean, who can imagine a 12-year-old? So here we go. Let's listen to it.
All right.
You can't win with original sin.
How about Tommy in Newport News? Hey, Tommy, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm just calling about the authorship of Matthew. Last week you mentioned that Matthew is anonymous, and I just want to note for you that Tacitus's annals are also anonymous.
Yeah.
And we get our first description to Tacitus from Tertullian 100 years after the fact.
Yeah.
But for Matthew, our first description is from Papias, only about 50 years after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to know how that's not special pleading for you to deny the authorship of Matthew when we have actually better evidence for Matthew than we do for Tacitus.
So you see what's going on right here, G-Man? So
I can hear it.
It's a very, he has a very good case. I just want to mention, so we believe, here's what I believe. I believe that Matthew was written by the Apostle Matthew, who is a tax collector. And one of the reasons I believe that is because there is he references, the one reference to taxes is made by Matthew when Jesus actually pulled out a fish out of the water and pulled out the coin that was going to pay for his taxes and Matthew's taxes. And so it's something that would be of interest to a tax collector. So it's like internal evidence for the authorship of Matthew. But he also is bringing up a good point with Tacitus, because everyone in the atheist community, they all believe in, of course, the writings by Tacitus and the writings by Josephus and the writings by anything that's external to the Bible. And so it was very wise of this little 12-year-old to bring up this idea of Tacitus. Do you say that's fair?
I think that's very fair. And I want to see how Matt deals with this.
Okay, so let's go.
I'm not saying that the authorship is necessarily wrong. I'm saying that we have no idea who the author is. And if we find out secondhand, as we would find out from Tacitus, etc. Can I finish? You asked me a question. Sure. I mean, I've already seen your video where you agree with me while you're disagreeing with me. But,
no.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
And then you adopt a particular tone at the end of your video that makes me sound like I don't sound. And so I like the fact that both of the videos are up there so people can go compare, because it was a bit silly.
Mute.
My point was...
Yeah.
Mute.
Yeah. So what he's doing is diverting the conversation like he did with us.
Right. He does this with a lot of the callers. His goal isn't to try to have like an adult conversation about these things. His goal is to try to embarrass the caller as much as possible. Now, he has a little prior knowledge about the individual that called into the show, But again, his goal is to shoot down everything from his character, reputation, as well as his argumentation. And he loves to deflect. Like I said, the guy's good at it. He's really good.
He is. Yeah, he's good at deflecting. So that is what he does. So let's listen to how he's going to get away from this whole thing. Now, let's also note, just so the audience knows, as far as the Gospels are concerned, there are no other attributions other than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so there's no ancient attributions to anyone else other than those four. And so when people claim that they're anonymous and all this kind of stuff, you need to say, well, who else have they been attributed to in the past? Because there have been nobody else. Okay, so even the early church fathers, like he's mentioning Papias, we've got a lot of people who referenced Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then, of course, we have some internal evidence that gives us good evidence, basically, that these are authored by the people that they say they were authored.
Let me say this, too. I'm very curious to what rules Matt Dillahunty is obeying when he determines who wrote something and who didn't write something. Again, when you call the atheist experience, Matt is sitting on the judgment seat deciding what's evidence, what isn't, who wrote this and who wrote that. A smart caller would be able to say to Matt, well, Matt, before we go any further, I need to know what rules you're going by to determine the authorship of a particular writing or something. Because if he doesn't have rules, then he can just make it up as he goes along, which a lot of atheists end up doing anyway.
Yes, exactly. Making it up as they go along and basically taking other ancient literature for granted and saying, okay, well, I'll accept the fact that Plato wrote this, and I'll accept the fact that so-and-so wrote that, or that it was written about Alexander the Great 300 years later. We've got some writings about Alexander the Great. So he'll accept all of this kind of stuff. However, then he's not going to accept anything in the Gospels.
Exactly. Let's continue.
Exactly. All right, so let's go.
When you're judging the authorship of the book by the standards that we would normally use if we were judging any other work from history.
Right.
However, that has nothing to do with mythical claims. And you cannot say that we can go ahead and say this is Matthean authorship based on the same standards that we might use somewhere else, and then also say, therefore, the stuff is necessarily true. My only point was that we don't have an autograph. We don't know who.
You want me to pause it?
Oh, okay, so Matt Dillahunty just made a positive claim, and he got away with that because, again, he's on the atheist experience. He's not going to hang out like, in one of these shows where he's got 4 or 5 people that he has to be accountable to. You know what I mean? Matt Dillahunty just said that the rules for authorship doesn't necessarily have to do with mythology. He hasn't even established that the Bible is dealing with mythology. He believes it's mythology, therefore it's mythology. That sounds like a fallacy to me. You know what I mean? He has to first establish that, number one, that he knows for a fact that we know nobody knows who the authorship is. Number two, everything that is dealt with in the book of Matthew would be considered fiction or deal in mythology to some point or another, which you can't, because when we start talking about the kings that existed at that time, when they collected their taxes, Pilate, and things like that, that's not mythology. These people actually existed. And if he doesn't know that, the man doesn't know nothing about history. So I'm very curious to find out how he knows that the book of Matthew is mythology. That's a positive claim that he made.
Yeah, that's true. And just like you mentioned, there's a lot of, in fact, one of the things was there was a person called Sir William Ramsay. And Sir William Ramsay was a non-believer in Christianity, and he decided to go disprove Christianity in the 1800s. And he went to some archaeological digs, and he started looking into the history of the ancient Near East. He traveled there. He spent a lot of time there, and he went through the book of Acts, and he was completely amazed at the job that Luke had done to identify all of these historical markers through the book of Acts. And because of that, he came to Christianity. And he was just completely blown away at how historically accurate the Book of Acts and Luke's book is. And Luke wrote the Book of Acts, as you probably know if people are listening here. And so that's just something that's pretty great.
And you want to know something else too, SJ? One of the
Yeah.
things that people need to remember when they're dealing with atheists on these topics is that they're not using new arguments. A lot of them just gather arguments that the Muslims are making against us, that other cults are making against us, and other religions are making against us. They're not saying anything original. If you're an apologist and you're used to sharing your faith to people, then you know you've heard these arguments from various different faiths. These are not his ideas. He's actually borrowing from theism in order to make his arguments. That's what's funny about this.
Yeah, that is. And I got a super chat here from Stupid Whore Energy. She's actually Sarah, so she's a really nice person, but she does have a strange question here. Do I think it's normal for a homosexual to have gay thoughts? I'm not sure what gay thoughts are, but I'm not sure. I don't know if she's referring to, I guess I don't know. Maybe it's a thoughts about a person of the same sex. I would guess that probably would happen. And
you know what it is. You know what it is. I made that was directed towards me, and no, I'm not gay. I made a YouTube video. Actually, I don't know if it was a video or I was in a hangout talking about how I try to pray away gay thoughts. Because you know how the devil puts things in your head and tries to tempt you with certain things. Now, I've never been gay, never been that way or whatever. I actively preach against it. You know what I mean? And they don't like it, but I actively preach against it. What they don't understand is that Satan puts things in your head, and you have to actively rebuke these things. Like I've never done drugs before. I would have to pray away the idea of doing cocaine or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of them heard me say that, and they took it out of context again without knowing what I was talking about.
See, the thing about G-Man, for the audience, if you don't know G-Man, he's been around a while on YouTube. I mean, he's got like 12,000 subscribers. He's got a pretty big channel. He's got a lot of people following him and who've been paying attention to him for years. And so we can expect that G-Man has probably said some things over the years that they are going to come back and try to ask about. They'll be like, wait a second, 10 years ago, you said this. It was like, so I'm sure that you've got a long history of interesting comments. I've only been on YouTube for a couple of years, so I don't have a long history like you do. So it's good. Okay, so let's go to.
Oh, you stay on here long enough. They'll take what you say out of context too.
Oh, I got that on Twitter all the time. I've got people who screenshot my tweets from 2016, and they want. I've got over 80,000 tweets. I'm of course made some mistakes, and of course they've been screenshotted and saved by some lovelies out there. So what do you do? So,
gotcha.
Okay, here we go.
The author is.
All right.
The names were ascribed by the church, and there are reasons to believe that Matthew wasn't the author because there's no reason for an eyewitness to rely so heavily on other accounts.
Matt, could I just address that real quick?
Sure.
You mentioned that it was mythical, but I just want to note here that Matthew is actually ancient bioi, and that's become the consensus since Richard Burridge authored his book, What Are the Gospels? And that's how the Gospels are actually biography, and they're intended to be history. They're not midrash. They're intended as historical documents.
And how many other history books do we consider true that talk about zombies?
I'm sorry, but this is a presupposition against miracles you're making, and you're going on a human argument.
No, it's not a presupposition against miracles.
Yes, it is.
No, it's
Yes, it
not.
is.
What it is how do we determine whether or not a particular claim is justified? Even if Matthew wrote the book and it was written by an eyewitness, that still doesn't mean that the events actually happened.
Hold on, Matt. You said even if it was written by an eyewitness, that doesn't mean it actually happened. But here I think, why doesn't it mean it happened? Because it mentioned zombies, quote unquote?
Yes. There are people living today who you can walk over and go talk to who will tell you about their experience of being abducted by aliens. Would you believe them?
Actually, the experiences with aliens, almost all of them, or at least all I've investigated, come from later hypnotic accounts, and they are actually using hypnotic suggestion onto them. So it is not at all similar because Jesus was not a hypnotist.
So you're saying there are no accounts.
Can I say something about that with the aliens?
Yeah, let's talk about this alien thing. Let's talk about this. So he is trying to
I'd like to say something about this.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something about the alien thing and whatnot. That shouldn't be too far-fetched for Matt Dillahunty, because if you think about because I don't understand. I'm sorry. I don't know if you know a whole lot about evolution or not, Eshik. I know you told me that wasn't your thing, but they believe that life came from non-life, right? And they believe that the diversity of life came from, a cell becoming a multi-cell, and and over, small changes over a very long time. You know what I mean? This could happen on any planet, in any one of these different galaxies that they claim that are out there. You know what I mean? And there could be life on another planet somewhere. Now he's trying to suggest that aliens are mythical according to his worldview. If evolution is true and abiogenesis is true, then it is more than likely, and I got a bunch of scientists to agree with me on this, that it is more than likely that there's life on other planets. What he's saying right now is just dumb, and he's getting desperate at this point. Matt's trying to get a quick KO, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, and so let's just bring this up. I want to go back and build on your point with aliens, because I've listened to Hugh Ross, and Hugh Ross has talked a lot about this kind of stuff. And one thing that Hugh Ross has mentioned is he's talking about the distance that we are from any other planet that would possibly have the 10 habitable zones that the Earth has. So, for example, we have this tidal zone. We've got the moon has to be a certain size. Jupiter is actually sort of like a receptacle for meteors and that kind of thing. It's pulling a lot of meteors and asteroids away from us. So it's actually, so there's a whole bunch of these what they call habitable zones. Now they've looked into the Hubble telescope out into the galaxies, other galaxies, and they haven't found any other planet that even has 2 habitable zones for advanced life such as ours. And so the reason I'm pointing that out is because they've looked so far that they said for any other physical life form, carbon-based like we are, to make it to Earth, it would have to travel something like hundreds of thousands of years in light years. And so there's no possibility, unless something can travel faster than light, there's no possibility for any other beings from any other parts of the world to make it to us. So there could be life out there, but it'd be so far away from us that it physically can't get here. And so yes, the idea of aliens here is just not going to happen as far as coming from a different planet. Now, Hugh Ross does a lot on what they call residual UFOs. And so it's just definitely an interesting study, because he's actually noted that in some cases, these people report alien experiences, and what he suspects, it's sort of like demonic activity, which is kind of interesting. Like he says, for example, people who practice in the occult, these countries where the occult has been practiced, like in Russia, for example, when people are practicing in the occult, there's a greater chance that they're going to report some sort of residual UFO, very negative, hostile experience. And in some cases, people have died from those experiences. So it's just
right.
Food for thought. It's kind of an interesting thing. But actually, the other thing that he said that I think we should talk about is he's trying to discount the entire Gospel of Matthew based on one little passage about what he calls zombies. And this is the idea where Jesus, after he was crucified, he went down and released spirits, essentially, who were, sort of chained to their sins on this world. And he released these spirits, and that sort of symbolically expressed, I think, in that passage. And so what Matt's doing is trying to pretend like this is, some sort of zombie, marching out through the streets. And I don't think that's exactly how Matthew put it. And so I don't think it's
exactly. Not to mention, if anybody has actually read the Gospel of Matthew, or have even read the New Testament, they would know, number one, actually, if you read the Bible altogether, you know that God claims to be all powerful. That's number one. Number two, he also claims that there's going to be a resurrection when he returns. The Bible in Matthew, it talks about how the resurrection happened when Christ, obviously gave up his life or whatever for us, and many godly people rose from the dead. If anybody take the time out to go read Thessalonians, First and Second Corinthians, you'll hear about how this incorruption must put on. I'm sorry, how this corruption must put on incorruption. How God is creating, how God has prepared new bodies for us so that we can dwell with Him. That's not a zombie apocalypse. That's not Christians believing in zombies. That's God resurrecting our souls, right? And then having our souls living new bodies that He has created. Again, Matt Dillahunty and a lot of these atheists, like I said, every time they open their mouth, they reveal they never really read the Bible, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that is a lot of the cases, because a lot of people, I don't think they fully read the Bible, or even if they have, there's a verse that I'm forgetting exactly, and I'm sure you'll probably remember where this is, but there's a verse that says always learning but never really grasping the truth. And so as much as they can read, a lot of the Bible is revealed to us, I think, through our relationship with the Holy Spirit. And so I think we can, when we read the Bible, I think we're able to see some insight that maybe people who discount the Holy Spirit and deny God might not understand as they read it. In fact, they even said that to some people, outsiders, they're going to think that the Bible is kind of strange. They're going to think that the whole story of Jesus being crucified and resurrected is odd. And so that's, in fact, Matt thinks that.
Let me ask you something though, SJ. Which one sounds more odd than you? I mean, more odd to you? God putting on human flesh, dwelling among us, dying for the sins of humanity, and then rising from the dead, proving that he's God. Or number two, and you're an educator, right? Do you believe that it's more likely that you and I are direct descendants of dinosaurs?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like seriously, they teach we're related to watermelons, you know? Yeah.
Well, it's evolution's kind of funny because what it is it's like a tree, and what happens is different species are supposed to branch off, and maybe they get blocked, they don't go back to be around each other, and they start adapting to their environments to the point where suddenly they can no longer reproduce with each other, and so then it forms a new species, and so it just keeps doing that. But the big question that with evolution that I think you're touching on, that I was just listening to this morning, was I don't know if anyone has had a chance to listen to this, but I highly recommend Braxton Hunter's review of Matt Dillahunty and Inspiring Philosophies debate, because Braxton Hunter really got into this idea of consciousness, which is what IP was focusing on, and where did consciousness arrive? And so one way that is really interesting to look at is this idea of, suddenly there's an awareness, and we're fully aware of ourselves, we're fully aware of our existence on this planet, unlike a lot of other life forms. And the question is, where did this consciousness come from? And they've done these double slit experiments, and in the double slit experiment, what happens is they see these actions of waves, and as soon as there's a person who's observing, and a person whose mind is there observing these waves doing these things, what happens is suddenly the waves break down into particles, and the way that particles act is very similar to how we would expect, say, things to act on this earth. So for example, if I hit a baseball with a bat, I'm going to expect that it's going to go a certain distance depending on the way I hit it and the angle, and that's how particles would act. And so the point is that was just saying that there has to be a conscious observer to bring about particle actions, and our earth is basically acting as like particles.
Exactly. So let's go on and see what he's going to say now.
Okay, let's go.
No testimonials that aren't the result of something like hypnosis.
Not of alien abductions, no, sir.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, but you're just wrong. You're making yet another broad-based claim that there are no one of these. You've done this several times.
I mean, an example to the contrary, though.
I gave you a hypothetical. What about? Stop! What about all of the other claims of other religions that claim miracles? Do you believe them as well?
No, sir, because the evidence is totally different. Now, you might refer to...
No, the evidence is not different.
Could you provide me an example?
The Quran?
No, the Quran was not written by an eyewitness. It does not include miracles. Actually, the miracles are found in the Hadith, and even...
So he's using the Quran as an example of miracles? Did you hear that? G-Man?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the biggest miracle that ever happened in a secular society. The biggest miracle that ever happened is that nothing existed. And then for some reason, these particles went in and out of existence, created this singularity, and then it expanded with no intelligence being involved with this whatsoever. That's a miracle. A miracle is when Jesus speaks and says, Lazarus, arise, and then he rises from the dead. And by the way, you can't compare that to any mythical story. You can't even do it with Superman, Batman, or anything like that. You know what I mean? You can look at Jesus walking on water. You can look at Jesus healing someone of their of leprosy, or someone with an issue of blood, or something like that. They can't compare that with a different religion. When Matt Dillahunty says that, Matt Dillahunty is making a broad claim without backing it up. Like the moment he says something like that, I can take Christianity and I can compare it with Islam, right? And then I can say, okay, show me something in Islam that supports the idea that the only begotten Son of God told Lazarus to rise from the dead, and he did. They can't do it because Muslims don't believe that God had a son. Or how about this? Let's take Christianity and Buddhism. Let's take Hinduism. let's use the New Age movement. You can't do it with none of those. Matt Dillahunty is speaking from pure ignorance right now. As a matter of fact, it's an argument from ignorance.
Yeah. And actually, I think you're making a really good point, because one of the other things that I want to just piggyback on is how unique Christianity is. So in all of these other different faiths that you pointed out, and in other faiths that you haven't pointed out, people think that they're going to earn their way to heaven, or they're going to earn nirvana, or they're going to earn themselves a
Right.
better, they're going to reincarnate, is Buddhism and Hinduism. They would be reincarnated into a superior life form or a superior caste or something like that. They believe that this is all based on their own works. And unlike that,
Mhm.
Christianity basically says, here's the Son of Man. And if you believe, John 3:16, if you believe, that's all you have to do. I mean, your works will come out of that. But the idea is faith. And so the idea is that it's not we're going to earn our way to heaven. It's that God has chosen us, and we have accepted his offer. And so it's completely different from these other works-based faiths. And the other thing I want to highlight on what you just said that I think is really important is you touched on this idea of Lazarus and some of the miracles that Jesus performed. And I would say that a lot of people who are skeptical in the audience might say, well, wait a second, I don't know if Jesus really performed those miracles. But think about this. Think about why the Pharisees were so incredibly threatened by a son of a carpenter. Okay, why were they so threatened? Unless Jesus was doing something to upend their situation. They knew that they owned the temples. They were having lots of wealth. People were praising them. They were in the streets praying and covering their faces when they were fasting and doing all this kind of stuff. I mean, covering their faces with white stuff to make it look like they were fasting, and they were just these most godly people. But they realized that Jesus, number one, called them out, and number two was performing miracles. And so he was a big threat to them, which is why they decided that they would rather Barabbas be traded for Jesus. And so you got this guy who's a known criminal. They'd rather have Jesus be crucified because they were completely threatened by his miracles and all the work he was doing.
Exactly. And just one more time, Matt Dillahunty brought up all these different religions. I want him to bring up a religion and show similarities to Christianity, where Christianity is unique in the sense that we're not depending on our works, we're depending on the works of God. Whereas these other religions, and I mean all of the other ones, are all saying that you got to work your way there. You already touched on that. But I want to hear Matt Dillahunty actually give an example without him dodging it. I bet you he's going to dodge it. I bet you he's going to.
Yeah, he tried the Quran, and I think it's backfired on him. So let's listen to what happens now. Now, just in case people don't know this, the Quran is written by one man in one generation in one country. And the interesting thing about the Quran is the Ramadan. Okay, I want to mention something really quickly because I haven't mentioned this in a while. The Ramadan is a period of time. It's about 30 days that Muslims are commanded to fast. And they're supposed to fast from sunrise to sunset. And it always falls in the summer, either somewhere between June and August. So it's a little different time each year between June and August, and it lasts for 30 days. Now, what's really interesting is because Muhammad never traveled far north and had no awareness of what's going on up there in the Arctic Circle, he thought that it was possible to fast from sunrise to sunset in the summer. However, people live in the Arctic Circle. It's completely light for 24 hours a day in many parts of, say, northern Sweden, for example, or northern Norway. It's completely light. So there's no way that they can actually follow Muhammad's commands to fast from sunrise to sunset when it's light 24 hours. And so had Muhammad known that, then that would have been, he would have obviously maybe changed that to a time instead of saying sunrise to sunset. But to highlight in our book, just in case you're curious, people say, well, wait a second. The one time in the Bible where God says we should fast from sunrise to sunset falls on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur occurs in the first week or so, like first couple of weeks of October every year. And it's the only time besides March, but it's the only time on the planet essentially when even the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere have a sunrise and a sunset. So see, God knew that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yes.
Again, there's no similarities between us and other religions. And I wish atheists would stop saying that because they make themselves sound silly when they do it.
Well, they always say, hey, you're an atheist to the 2,999 other gods. And I think that's the silliest argument because it completely tries to level our Lord on the same level as Zeus. It's just silly.
You want to know something else, SJ? They say
Yeah.
that there's more than the God of the Bible. They say there's Allah and there's like 5,000 other different religions. But if you pay attention to an atheist, whenever they're making their arguments, 99.9999999% of the time, it's the Abrahamic God that they're always going after. They're not going after nobody else. You want to know why? Because they actually believe what the Bible says, that there's only one God, and that is the God of Scripture.
Yes, and you know what? To highlight what you're saying is Hugh Ross pointed that out too. He also pointed out when people have these demon experiences and those kind of things that the big threat is Christ. The big threat is not Hindu gods or any of these other gods that are out there in the world, Zeus or Thor or anything like that. The big threat is Christ.
Exactly.
So should we
So
go
let's
on?
continue.
All right.
Yes.
Muslim scholars dismiss the Hadith. Miracles are not found in the Quran.
Really?
Really.
Okay.
So you can't provide me an example, can you?
Off the top of my head, can I provide you an example? No.
Well, you seem to you claim to know the
Okay,
information well, but you can't provide me examples.
Pause.
Here we go.
Pause. Wait a minute. So let me get this straight here. He said, let's not let him off the hook. And Matt, if you're watching this, Matt, or you're going to watch this in the future, this is why I want you in the hangout, because you need to be held accountable. These other atheists deify you, but I'm not going to do that. Neither is SJ. You just got finished saying that the miracles in Christianity can be found in any of these other different religions. That's what you basically just got finished saying. Then you brought up the Quran, and you brought up, and Islam was brought up, and you couldn't find an example. Okay, I can show you that Muhammad wasn't a real prophet. I can show you he was a false prophet. That's number one. And number two, I know ain't no miracles mentioned in the Quran. You understand what I'm saying? He's speaking from pure ignorance. This is just another example, SJ, of a caller calling in, Matt being so arrogant that he's not prepared to answer certain people when they call the show. That's what this is.
Exactly. So the caller basically said, you name those miracles. You're saying there's miracles with other faiths. Well, you go ahead and name those. And so, and I can say that there have been things like, for example, in India, one of my friends went over there and he saw a person levitating, and it was kind of sort of magical in a way. And I can say that in a world, this is the world in which we operate, where we feel like this is also a spirit-filled world. I would say that it's possible that there could be some sort of tricks and maneuvers by these spirits in this world. I mean, we've got this activity going on. So I would just point out that that's part of the Christian belief, and that there's that this is a
you know what it is, SJ?
Yeah.
You know what it is, SJ? We got God and we got Satan. At the end of the day, the devil can imitate God and try to do things like God does too. But there's mere imitations. We see this in the book of Exodus, where Moses throws his rod down and it becomes a snake, but the magicians throw down their rods and they become two snakes. But at the end of the day, it was the serpent that Moses had that defeated the other two that beat the other two serpents from the magicians. So we know that Satan is an imitator. You know what I mean? He tries to pretend like he's God and tries to do certain things to win people to their causes. So even there, Matt Dillahunty doesn't even have an argument, because again, the moment we flip this to, oh, okay, you're talking about demonic activity. Well, that does nothing but prove that the Bible is true as well. And I can give you Bible examples as well as real-time examples. One of them that you just mentioned about this guy levitating, and we have magicians doing that. We have a lot of weird things going on here in the world. We got people claiming that they're hearing ghosts, being abducted by aliens, when in reality, a lot of us believe they're being abducted by demons. You know what I mean? And experimenting on people or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that validates the Bible. That doesn't validate Matt Dillahunty's argument at all.
No, and actually just going back to the whole idea of the Muslim faith is, I think that you brought this up, and we mentioned this before, but I think people should look into what Muhammad encountered in the cave, because apparently, according to some former Muslims that I know who've actually converted to Christianity, they said that Muhammad had an encounter in the cave that originally he perceived of as a demon. And then later they changed it. Later, the people who rewrote the Quran, because there were people who rewrote the Quran, when they rewrote it, they changed it to the angel Gabriel.
Exactly. So let's get back to Matt Dillahunty's destruction.
Here we go.
And your entire denial of the
I don't
resurrection.
have to provide you examples of other religions. I'm talking about what standards of evidence I would use in order to determine whether an account is believable or not. And an anonymous book, even if we think we might know who the authorship was, which is not necessarily the case, talking about miracle claims is not sufficient evidence to believe the claim.
Why not?
Because
What? No.
should it be?
Pause.
I heard from some guy.
Pause
Yeah.
this. Okay, number one, I want the atheist community to listen to me very carefully. Our claim, and I'm talking about pistos when I'm talking about this, okay? Our claim, it is by faith that we believe. SJ, I know you were listening to a video that I did before I came in here a couple of hours ago. I was just talking about this, and I was talking about faith, okay? And they think, the atheist community, when they hear the word faith, they're saying, oh, you just believe it because somebody said it. No, our faith is grounded in evidence. You know what I mean? We have historical documents. We have examples that God has shown us in our own personal lives where he has shown us in such a way that we take it on faith, backed by evidence that what the claims are in the Bible is actually true. You know what I mean? A lot of the things that happened in the Gospel of Matthew, if these atheists wasn't so lazy, and I don't mean to be mean, you know, because I know you try to be nice to them on this channel, but I'm not trying to be mean, but if these guys pick up a history book, they can learn about Agrippa. They can learn about Nero. They can learn about Pontius Pilate. They can learn about these things, but the atheists are too lazy to do these things. And again, he's still assuming that the book of Matthew was written by an anonymous author. He hasn't proven that. He made a baseless claim. Number two, he's trying to say that the book of Matthew is filled with mythology. He hasn't proven that either. He believes that all he's got to do is sit there and deny the claims that are being made, boom, and they become mythicism. He's not a Bible scholar. He claims he went to Bible school for 5 years, but this man doesn't know anything that he's talking about at all. And I know I say that a lot, SJ, but it's really true. He really doesn't know anything.
I do feel like that. I do feel rather skeptical of people because there seems like there are so many people who are now atheists who say that they went through some sort of pastor or priestly training or something like that. And it kind of makes me wonder what's going on in this training if they really did. What is going on in this? You know what I'm saying?
You got some horrible teachers or something because they're not being taught anything. Because it's not by evidence. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, it is by evidence that you... No, it is by faith that we believe. Our faith is backed by evidence. We have authors. We have original documents. We have history. We have historical people. We have the persecution of the church. We have a lot of things to back up our claims. We have hieroglyphics to prove that the Israelites were in fact in Egypt. You know what I mean? But they ignore this stuff. And because, now you're going to love this, Eshe, because he didn't see it himself, he believes that there's no way you should be able to believe these things. However, this man's a follower of Socrates. He's a follower of Plato. You understand what I'm saying? He's a follower of Charles Darwin. You know what I mean? A lot of them would quote the words of Nietzsche. They never met these people. They never had a conversation with these people, nor do they even know if these people ever really lived or whether or not they're just a mythical story, based on the rules that they're using on whether or not the Bible is actually true. So I think it's kind of sad that he thinks he can sit there in that chair and then make it look like we can't convince him that God exists, therefore no God exists. That's ridiculous.
That's something that I think you're bringing up a good point, because a lot of times people say, well, show me some evidence that God exists. And so we get out and we'll start saying, okay, here's a cosmological, here's a teleological, here's a moral argument, here's Jesus Christ, here's the whole story of the resurrection, here's the support. You know, we've got 42 sources within 150 years that have supported the New Testament, including those in the Bible, but also many outside of the Bible, and 9 hostile witnesses. And you provide all this evidence, and then they just say, okay, I don't believe you. And it's like, well, you asked for evidence. I gave you evidence. Now you say that that's not good enough. And what is good enough? I mean, and then I think the bigger question is, if, for example, it's been said, Matt Dillahunty has said that if he found out that Christianity is true, he still wouldn't worship Jesus. And so there you go. That's really what it is.
That should tell you something, that you're wasting your time trying to prove to him that God exists, that people should attack him on the moral argument, show him that he's not a good person, and preach the gospel to him. That's why sometimes good old-fashioned preaching is the best way to go about doing it. And I also want to say this too about what you said about the evidence that you were talking about, SJ, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
If those arguments don't count as evidence, right, for them, then what do we call those arguments? Because here's the thing. Let's flip the script here a little bit, SJ. I wasn't there when this single cell became a multi-cell, became a fish-like creature, became an amphibian or a reptile, came out the water, you know what I mean, and did all these other things and whatnot. You know what I mean? I wasn't there for none of that stuff. And a lot of times when I ask them for evidence, they're showing me pictures. They're showing me crayon drawings. They're showing me plaster of Paris bones, and they're telling me that that's evidence that that what they're saying is true. It is a contradiction what they're doing there. If you're going to tell me that my argumentation is not evidence, then neither is your plaster of Paris bones, neither is your cartoon drawings, and neither is your indoctrination that you're repeating from school considered evidence either. You understand what I'm saying? You have a standstill at this point. At some point, we got to be honest in these conversations about what's evidence and what is not evidence. And I'm sorry, a lot of atheists, not all of them, but a lot of them are not going to play that way. A lot of them are going to make it up as they go along. SJ, if God came down from heaven, I listened to an atheist say this to me one time. His name was Alex Biden. He said that if God came down from heaven and held a dead star in his hand, they still would not believe that was God, because how does he know he's not living in the Matrix? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, even Braxton Hunter had this thing, and so did IP, but they basically told Matt, they said, if God, Braxton Hunter said something like, if the moon, like if an asteroid went around the moon and suddenly the words were printed out in 2 languages, this is God and I love you, would you believe it? Or something, I forget exactly what the words were. And Matt's like, well, no, I would think my mind was playing tricks on me. It's like, what does it take?
That's classic denialism. That's classic denialism.
Classic denialism, absolutely. And I want to say, I see some people in here asking questions. Shrish Zen, he's one of the ones who follows you, and I saw him this morning. He wanted to know if the Gospels, the apostles believe the evidence of Jesus's resurrection. And I wanted to mention something. The apostles had tons of doubts, during the Gospels, and all of that, a lot of it was kind of embarrassing the way they had so many doubts. But even the time when they went out fishing and Jesus said, they came in and they hadn't caught anything and they were kind of disappointed. And Jesus said, well, throw the net over on this side. And they're like, oh no, Jesus, come on. I mean, we're not going to throw it in there. But they had faith and they threw it in. And guess what? 153 fish were captured, because that was like Jesus's parable or way to tell us that we need a little faith to take the first step. And then he's going to provide after that. And so I just say for the atheists in the audience, just a little bit of faith and he'll provide.
And one of the things that I noticed during this call, Matt Dillahunty doesn't want to take nothing on faith. Like, do you notice that everything that Matt believes, or the way he's trying to present himself at what he believes, has to be something that is grounded in empirical evidence, something that is right there in front of his face. If he can't see it, then he's not going to believe it type mentality. But if I was on the call, then Matt, where's your proof that you're related to a cow? Well, you have to talk to a scientist. Wait a minute. You believe you're related to a cow. You believe this. Where's your evidence? Well, you got to talk to a scientist. Well, if you believe this, then why do I got to talk to a scientist about what you believe? You understand what I'm saying? So he can take things on faith. You know what I mean? So it's just when it comes to God, that's when they start making all these weird rules saying, no matter what, guys, when you get in these conversations with them, whatever you do, don't take anything that they're saying on faith. It's just embarrassing the way they carry themselves sometimes.
Well, that's the thing is when you, like, for example, let me just tell for the audience, if you look at the fact that, so we have DNA, and fortunately in the mid part of last century, they actually looked into the human genome and they realized there are 3.5 billion well-ordered, what they call letters. They're 4 letters. They have symbols, but they're letters A, C, G, and T. And so these things are perfectly ordered in the human genome. And if you think about that, it's the way it's put in biology books is they refer to it as code. And so if you actually think that something could be perfectly ordered, why would you not think that a coder was involved? And the comparison is from John Lennox. He said, if you went to the beach and you saw the words "I love you" written in the sand, would you realize, yes, that's basically some words put together, kind of similar to how DNA 3.5 billion of these letters put together. But we've got or 3.5 billion, I should say, these letters, but they're in a sequence. And if we think about that, then we would realize there has to be a coder, just like you would think at the beach, somebody wrote that in the sand. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me ask you something. If me and you went to a crime scene, right, and we saw a dead body, right, and there were fingerprints on the dead body, would that be considered evidence that the fingerprints that's on the dead body could be the murderer or could have some involvement with the person who was killed?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you got fingerprints. Now, what if we saw footprints walking to the body and walking away from the body? Would that count as evidence that the person who was walking to the body and walking away from the body possibly could have been involved with the murder?
Yes. So we're starting to build a cumulative case.
Exactly. And let's say, hypothetically speaking, you go outside the house and you see shell casings of evidence that a gun has been fired. Would that be considered evidence that possibly that the person who has all them holes in him could have been shot by the person that was outside using a particular gun?
Exactly. Yep. More
And then,
evidence.
and then we can go to the shell casings and we can determine what type of bullet was in the gun, and then we can determine what kind of gun it was, right?
Correct.
Right. And this is how we try to argue for the existence of God. You understand? And it's what you said earlier. They have to take a step out on faith and say, you want to know what? There are fingerprints here. Let's follow the evidence and see where it leads. Unfortunately, they don't do that with God. They don't do it. They ignore Tacitus. They ignore all of the secular authors. I'm sorry, not the secular authors, the secular historians. They ignore all the history books. They ignore the Christian persecution that happened during the early church. They ignore a lot of things. They ignore the original documents. They ignore any evidence that the Vatican may have of bones of the apostles or anything like that. They ignore a lot of things because they don't want to follow the evidence, because they don't want to know that God exists. It's hard to get a person who doesn't want to start off on faith and say, hey, there are the fingerprints and there's some shell cases there. You know what I mean? We should take the time out to go find out what kind of gun this is. But person isn't willing to do that, you're never going to be able to convince them that God exists. And if you listen to Matt's not interested in looking at fingerprints. He's not interested in looking at the shell casings. He's not interested in looking at the footprints. He doesn't want to go outside of the house and go look around and see if there's any more evidence whether or not this person was murdered or not. All he wants to do is say, you want to know what? It's your job to convince me. All I got to do is sit here, and if I don't like what you got to say, I'm just going to deny it. That's all Matt ever does.
That's true. And, I want to build on something that you said just there, and also what you said with evolution, because something that when a lot of people go to Darwin's book and they talk about survival of the fittest, which really means survival of the most adaptable. And so this is this idea that when you adapt well and you survive, that speaks to this idea of being selfishness. So the big confusion comes for atheists and for people who believe in Darwinian evolution is this idea of why do we value things like humility and forgiveness? Because these don't speak to something that we should be socially evolved to value, but we value humility. We don't like pride. We don't like selfishness. We value empathy. And a lot of people will use a just so argument that's kind of similar to what Rudyard Kipling came up with in his just so argument, like camels have these humps just so that people can fit between the humps. It's just like they'll come up with an argument to try to explain why we actually have these desires to do really good things. Like, why do we care about the truth? Why do we care about justice? Why do we have these universal moral codes that speak to that kind of stuff, that transcend generations and eras and people? It's because there's a moral lawgiver, a universal and transcendent moral lawgiver. And that's why all of the earth knows, for example, we should follow the golden rule. All of the earth knows that we should do what's right and tell the truth and be just and fair and kind and treat our humans as fellow humans, and treat them well. And so this is all innate. It's inside of us, in our conscience, and that just speaks to a moral lawgiver. And it's not explained by evolution. People say, well, it helped people in their social groups to be more empathetic. Yeah, well, I'm sure, the Nazis, we can condemn Nazis because we realize that they were doing the exact opposite. So we have these examples that we can condemn because we realize it goes against our moral conscience.
Exactly. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah, so there's a reason why all of humanity have these, we're not just out to survive, we're out to thrive and to do what's right. And so so that just is another evidence for God. And so we have lots of evidence for God.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's continue.
Okay, here we go.
Or you tell me that this happened to you, and I have no other evidence other than your word that this happened, it's not sufficient to believe that. If you use that as a standard of evidence, you would be believing all sorts of contradictory claims and all sorts of unreal claims.
It's much more likely
if that is an
made up.
acceptable standard of evidence for you, then it's not surprising that you find this stuff convincing.
Matt, you said that I would be believing all sorts of contradictory stuff, but you couldn't actually provide me an example of something else. So
I did. You said it's not.
What's that, G-Man? Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I got a comment. He said that the only reason we believe that Matthew was written by Matthew is because we're taking the word of one person. That's the only reason we believe it. And this is the difference between a person who has read the Bible and a person who has studied it. You know what I mean? A person who has studied it knows the arguments for and knows the arguments against what it is that a person believes. There are a bunch of books in the Bible, particularly Genesis and Exodus and some other books in the Bible that one can make an argument against. But it doesn't mean that the arguments that they're making against it is actually true. Matt Dillahunty said that we only have the word of one person that suggests that Matthew is true. Okay, that's not true. All right, we have theologians, we have historians, we have the original authors. You understand what I'm saying? We have a lot of things to come to the conclusion that Matthew was written by Matthew. I don't understand atheists sometimes. I think that they think that unless you are scientifically literate or something, SJ, that they think that we don't dive into detail about like certain topics. Like, for example, who wrote the book of Acts, for example? You mentioned it earlier. The book of Acts was written by Luke, and the book of the book of Luke was written by Luke. And there's two ways we know that this is true. And I'm only going to name two ways, because I only need to name two ways. Number one, we know this because of what is it? Because of history. Yeah, Theophilus and history. That's number one. And then number two, we can go by penmanship. We can go by how a person actually writes in their writing style to determine whether or not a person wrote something or not. Now, Dillahunty will not acknowledge that. You know what I mean? There is some question of whether or not Matthew was written by the Apostle Matthew or whether or not it was a different Matthew or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, we believe that, at least I believe anyway, that the book of Matthew was written by the Apostle Matthew, who was, I believe, is a tax collector, if I'm not mistaken. It's probably one of the most detailed gospels in the entire Bible. As a matter of fact, is it Mark or is it Matthew that's the most detailed?
Matthew has what I really like about the book of Matthew is that all of the references that are fulfilled prophecies from the Old Testament. He's a ton of them.
Right.
And
right.
So,
and each gospel is directed towards a different person. You know what I mean? Or a different group of people. You know what I mean? Like Matthew was written for the Jews. The Gospel of John, I think was only focuses on the last few weeks of Jesus' life. It doesn't focus on him being born and all that stuff and whatnot, right?
Right. So Matthew and Luke include the birth narratives.
Right. And Mark is the shortest gospel of them all. And I think John would appeal more to a Gentile, more so than Matthew or Luke or Mark or whatever. So
yeah, I agree with you. I think, and I would say Luke a little bit too, because Luke was a Gentile.
Right.
And
so if Matt doesn't even know these things, how does he know that the book of Matthew, that we don't know who the authors are? So again, he follows people like Plato and Socrates and people he's never met in his entire life. He doesn't know if these people said these things, but he has no problem accepting that these things came from these people. You understand what I'm saying? He'll accept that by faith, but he won't accept Matthew by faith.
No, exactly. There's a bias there, and it's clear. And actually, I want to say something. John Lloyd is in the, he just did a super chat. Thank you so much, John Lloyd. And he says, I noticed Bart Ehrman uses a corrupt Bible supplied by the Vatican, Greek codices with 3,036 errors, 10, 20, 30, 40 words dropped, repeat sentences, books removed, books added, all designed to undermine the KJV. So I'm not sure what version Bart Ehrman uses, but you and I mentioned this before, what Bart Ehrman does and how in his second edition of Misquoting Jesus, he admitted that the Christian tenets have been accurately passed down through the generations. The original Christian tenets are preserved in the current New Testament, is what he said, basically the resurrection narrative and all that kind of stuff. So the important stuff about Christianity has been retained, even according to an agnostic called Bart Ehrman.
So what if Bart Ehrman had a conversation with Matt Dillahunty? I mean, those two would have a lot of arguments about what you just said about what Bart Ehrman said. You know what I mean? About the words of Jesus and everything. You know what I mean? These atheists can't even agree on these things. Again, Matt Dillahunty makes himself the judge, jury, and executioner on whether or not something is evidence or not. I don't think Matt's being honest, and I believe that, like you said, that his bias is spreading out like a bright sun or whatever. You know what I mean? And he's not. It goes back to what you said earlier. He's not willing to take that one step out on faith to investigate whether or not these things are actually true or not. You know, so let's get back to the video. And
no, you're right. He doesn't want to. Okay, here we go.
I don't have an encyclopedia at my fingertips, so I cannot provide you the counter, and I'm trying to save time.
I've looked into it. It's not there. It's not there. So please don't make claims that you cannot back up right here.
I didn't make a claim. I
Yes,
asked
you did. You said I'd be believing contradictory things. You have not been able to back that up. I
I
want you to
said
back that up.
if you used that standard of evidence, you would be in a
Okay.
position to be believing contradictory claims.
What other claim would I believe by this standard of evidence? What other claim?
Last week, the angel Moroni appeared to me and told me that you were going to call the show. Do you believe me?
No, I don't. I'm not going to tell
Why
you
not?
But I've got. But
Why not? You have nothing other than
Can I
my
finish the
claim.
statement? Can I finish the statement, please? Okay, the reason that I believe it because a popular theory to the resurrection is that the disciples lied about it, and this is refuted by social
That's
factors.
not
like
my theory.
Hold on.
That's
I
not
know,
my
but
theory.
hold on,
I
hold
see
on.
no reason to address it.
I know. I'm about to make an analogy. I'm about to make an analogy. Now,
You want to pause it?
Yeah. That is hilarious. He just made up something out of thin air and said that that he's correct, that he's going to come up with some contradictory thing or whatever. Now, here's the thing. We're not making that claim. We're saying again that we have history, we have theologians, we have authors, we have originals, we have original documents, we have a lot of different things to back up our claim. What if anybody watching this was paying attention, Matt Dillahunty is the one that's making things up at this particular point. He's in trouble right now. He can't prove that the gentleman that is calling to the show is going to be guilty of making contradictory claims. He can't prove it. That's why he had to come out there and make that fictional claim. It's ridiculous.
And you know what he just did too, that I'll build on what you just said, is he decided that he was losing this argument, so he was going to throw out a red herring. And what a red herring is, it means it's like a stinky fish that throws the dog off the trail. And so he decided to bring up the angel Moroni, which is the idea of the Mormons. Just let's know, this is a 1.6% of the U.S. population is Mormon. So this is a tiny percentage of people. So he brings up this angel Moroni trying to deflect, but the caller, Tommy, did not bite. Did you notice that?
No, he's not going to bite, and he's going to embarrass him further. So let's get back to it.
All right, here we go. So again, just so anyone doesn't know this, if you just joined us, this caller, I believe, is 12 years old. So it's amazing.
Let's get to it.
Here we go.
My theory on why you would say that is that you're lying for a specific purpose. Here we have a motive, and we don't have social factors like kinship to refute that. We don't have you dying for your belief, and we do have good attestation, but I'd rely mostly on kinship here. We don't have that kind of evidence, and so the evidence is far better for the disciples than it is for your claim that Moroni visited you last week. Far better. For those
How
two
is
factors that
it better? I understand what you're saying about ulterior motives, etc. But you have a book that you don't have any originals of, that you aren't positive who the author is, with claims in it that aren't supported by evidence from elsewhere.
Okay, so let's talk about what we do have
That's a
here.
lie.
Okay. So here's a typical thing that atheists will do is they will say, instead of referring to the Bible as a collection of 66 books, they try to say that it's one book. Okay, we have a book.
You're a teacher, SJ. How does that make you feel when you hear that a library of books is one book as a teacher?
Yeah, it's
How does that make you feel?
frustrating. It's frustrating because it's these books were written over, as you and I have mentioned before, 3 continents, 3 languages, 1,500 years, 40 plus authors. So we have a collection of books. And so this whole idea of we have a book, then he says, well, we don't know who the author is. He has no, as we mentioned before, there's no ancient people or person or historian or anybody who said that those gospels are attributed to anybody else aside from the 4 authors. And the other thing is, he's not talking about Paul. And Paul, I think, if we only had Paul's books, if that's all we had, I think we have enough.
I think we do too. The only issue we would run into is, what did Jesus actually say? That'd be the only issue.
Right, but the fact that
the words that he's using is still true.
Yeah, and 1 Corinthians 15, they estimate, even Bart Ehrman estimates that was written within 5 years. It was memorized immediately after Jesus was resurrected, and within 5 years, this creed had come about. That's 1 Corinthians 15, that basically says that 500 people witnessed the risen Christ.
Exactly. For those of you that are watching this, Matt is trying to create doubt. I've mentioned this on GTV a couple of times when I was exposing the psychology of the atheist experience. He's trying to create doubt in your mind because he thinks that we've never taken the time out to ask ourselves, well, who wrote the book? What was the book about? What was the purpose of it? How did the people interpret it? Proper exegesis, which a lot of people in the body of Christ actually use when we go about trying to understand the scriptures. You know what I mean? So he knows that if he creates enough doubt in your mind, you're going to question the word. If you question the word, there's a chance you might reject Christianity. At least in his thinking, that's what he's thinking is going to happen. So just want to let everybody know that little tidbit.
So that's exactly it. So he is trying to get us to question our beliefs. And what's really interesting is years ago in 2016, or maybe it was 2015, it was right around that time when I had gotten on Twitter, and some guy who was an atheist was constantly challenging me, and he kept saying, you need to read Bertrand Russell. And I have to admit, I was scared at first because I wasn't sure about my faith. And so I went and I read Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. And I thought, if this is the best they have, whoa, they're going down. I mean, this is crazy. That's the best they have. And so then I haven't found, since then it's even worse. It's like it's all gone downhill since Bertrand Russell. Somehow people are listening to them. But once you look into the evidence for Christianity, wow. It blows you away how much evidence we have. And so,
but you got to be willing to listen, SJ. That's the thing. And a lot of them don't want to listen.
If you don't want to, and if you don't, a lot of people are having their fun times right now, and they're thinking it's really fun not having to have this external source of accountability. I'm going to go out and do whatever I want to and not worry about anything that any judgment call or anything like that. But you can't, just because you don't want a source of accountability doesn't mean that source isn't there. So
there's a story in the Bible about the flood, and there was a lot of people other than Noah that had this idea. They can do whatever they want. They don't got to worry about judgment. They never heard of rain before. They think he was crazy for building this ark. And when he finished building the ark, and the moment him and the animals and his family got in that ark and the door was closed, they believed in rain then. And they believed that there was going to be a flood then. And it was too late for those people to be saved. If you're watching this and you're listening to us critique this video, you need to take a step out on faith and at least consider what is being said before you begin to laugh at us and laugh at the things that we're saying, because we actually do have more evidence for the claims that we're talking about than Matt does.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the ark, because I think that there's something there. If people actually look at the Bible, what we mentioned last week is what's really fascinating about the Bible is you can read it on a very simple level and you can read it on a complex level. If you look at the story of the ark and you consider that Jesus also in a way was an ark, and Jesus is the one who saves people. So he saved, through his on the cross, which is kind of similar wood and that same idea. But the other thing is this idea of there's a certain time you're going to have, and then the door is going to be shut. And it reminds me of what Jesus did at the banquet in the parable when people would show up at the door, and we were waiting for the master to show up, and the master would shut the door when if people basically didn't accept the offer that the master had made.
Exactly. And once that door is shut, it's shut. Ain't no opening it back up. It's judgment after that. So just think about that while you're listening to what we're saying. If you're so confident that we don't know who wrote the book of Matthew and Matthew is not reliable, just go check your history to see how right you are, because you're going to find out that you're wrong and you don't have history to support your claims. Anyway, let's continue with the video.
Let's do that. Let me just mention one thing about Matthew. William Lane Craig does something pretty interesting as far as the names of the authors. I think a lot of times people try to throw us off and say, well, I'm not believing that people had the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so therefore I'm not going to believe that the authors were those four authors. It wouldn't matter if their names were Bartholomew or Herpert or any other kind of crazy name, Geraldine. Whatever the authors' names were, it doesn't really matter. Just look at the books themselves and the content of the books. It doesn't matter who authored them. Okay, so that's the thing, that we have internal consistency. And I highly recommend everyone read Lydia McGrew's book, Undesigned Coincidences, and the Mirror or the Mask, because she looks at a lot of internal coincidences between the Bibles, and undesigned coincidences is what she calls them. But this idea where we're kind of left hanging in one gospel, and then the other one you might go to, and the rest of the story is explained, but they didn't do it on purpose. They just tend to go together like a puzzle piece.
All right, cool.
Right, so I'm going to go to, here we go.
Long history of spin. And a long history of other people, of motivation for propagating these particular stories.
Okay, Matt, you said Well, we don't have originals, and I just want to put out we don't have any originals from any manuscript of antiquity. That's special pleading there. He said we don't know who the author is.
It's not special pleading because I'm not comparing it to other things in antiquity. I'm talking about standards of evidence.
That's the entire point, though. You're applying a different standard of evidence to this document than you are for others.
No, I'm not, because there aren't other documents that I would accept that make these claims.
So that any document that makes miraculous claims is disavowed by you automatically.
Yes.
Right? Okay,
yes.
So then how can you claim to be an atheist based on the evidence if you're automatically going to dismiss every piece of evidence to the contrary based on the fact that
I did not say I would dismiss every piece of evidence to the contrary. What I said was that if I would dismiss texts that made that claim. If there was additional supporting evidence, that's the point that I'm getting to, is how do we go about establishing whether or not a claim is supported by sufficient evidence to justify accepting the claim.
Okay, pause. Okay. Okay, two things I want to mention. I want to talk about these miraculous claims first, and then I want to deal with how do we know that we have good evidence about the things that we believe, right? So miraculous claims that he accepts, that he reads about all the time, is that a singularity 7 or 8 billion years ago or 10 billion years ago, right, got really hot, the singularity, right? And it got really hot, and it was a combination of matter and energy, and then and then it had a hydrogen in it, and then it got really hot, and then it expanded, you know what I mean? And it created, and then it cooled down, and then molecules started coming together, and that's how we got our universe. You know what I mean? I don't know how nature decided that this planet gets 16 moons, this one gets 1 moon, this one gets 10 moons, this one don't get another moon or whatever, but he believed this miraculous claim that this singularity expanded over a very long period of time. But I'll take it even further. All right. They believe a singularity can be made when a star dies. Right? When it becomes a supernova or when it dies. Right? So when it dies, it becomes a singularity, according to them. Right? And another universe can be made, I guess, through that way or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that they can't prove any of this. All of this stuff is speculation and what they think and what they hope and when they wish upon a star. They have no evidence for this whatsoever. So he does accept miraculous claims. He just accepts miraculous claims that comes from theories where there's no God involved. That's number one. Number two, how do we know when we have good evidence to believe something? Okay, that's when you have historians repeating what we're saying today, where they say, I witnessed the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, we have modern day historians who have done the research and have done the history and have shown that this is just as historical as anything that has ever happened. For example, Ashley, have you heard of Simon Greenleaf?
Simon Greenleaf?
Yeah, Simon Greenleaf was I believe was a lawyer.
Are you talking about the guy who talks about servant leadership?
I believe it was a lawyer. And what happened was he put the resurrection to the test. And he was an atheist. He was not a Christian. And he came back and after he did all of the research and looked at all of the historicity and everything, he came to the conclusion that the resurrection was just as historical as any other event that's ever happened in history. You know what I mean? He knows that Simon Greenleaf is a real person and that he did and that he did this research to determine that the resurrection happened. He's just going to deny it. He knows that we have originals. He's going to deny it. He knows that we have a copy of 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 a copy. If he knows anything about Jewish culture, the Jews was really particular about writing down the words of God. You know what I mean? The scribes was really particular about copying these things down every so many years or whatever. You know what I mean? He ignores that. He ignores archaeology. He ignores paleontology. He ignores what do you call it? The hieroglyphics from the Egyptians. He ignores the eyewitnesses who watched Jesus rise from the dead. He ignores Tacitus and these other secular writers who wrote about Jesus. He ignores all of that. You know what I mean? And if you're ignoring history, you're ignoring archaeology, you're ignoring paleontology, you're ignoring biology, you're ignoring all of these things, how can anyone show you anything that is considered evidence? How can anyone do that? This man, for crying out loud, believes he's related to a pterodactyl. There's no evidence for that whatsoever, but he believes it. So if you could take that on faith, Matt, why can't you say, you want to know what? A guy by the name of Matthew probably did write the Gospels because of all the history that's involved and penmanship and the theologians who have done all of this work and and have done all of this research to show that Matthew probably did write the gospel. You know what I mean? He won't accept any of that because number one, he's a materialist. That's number one. And number two, he can't accept any of it because if he does, he has to acknowledge the existence of God.
Yeah, and you're right. He would probably he'll accept anything that's related to science. Like I would say he'd accept things related to science, but of course he'll accept scientific theories that haven't been I mean, he'll accept, I shouldn't say scientific theories, but he'll accept scientific ideas. Like, for example, I would imagine that he would probably accept something that Lawrence Krauss wrote with respect to this whole idea of the universe before nothing. Lawrence Krauss wrote a book that posits that there's those wave functions before the Big Bang, and he has absolutely no evidence of that. There's also things that atheists sometimes accept as this idea of a multiverse, but we have zero evidence for a multiverse. And so the things that they might accept come with no evidence, and yet the things they won't accept do come with a lot of evidence. Like Matt made it really clear right here that he is not going to accept any book that contains miracles in it. And so no matter what you give Matt, no matter what the evidence you provide, he's already decided, he's already has a presupposition against miracles.
Let me ask you something, SJ, and I've asked atheists about the same question too. He doesn't accept miracles, but what laws of nature were followed concerning the singularity expanding? What were the laws of nature
That's
when
what they all
the
came
singularity
about.
expanded?
See, that's the interesting thing. That's what it all came about. So in case people don't know this cosmological argument, it's pretty good. So everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe, which is time,
Right.
space, and matter, began to exist, and that, of course, includes the laws we're governed by. And then the universe, the universe, time, space, and matter began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. That's the real simple Kalam cosmological argument. And Matt has actually alluded to accepting that portion of the argument in the debate that he had with IP. However, he just doesn't accept what he calls the excess baggage that comes on after that, which is a reference to the Christian God. And so he's decided that he won't accept the Christian God. So Christians would take that argument and continue on the personal nature of God, the idea that God is immaterial, is transcendent and immanent, so also outside of the universe and within the universe, and also intentional and that kind of thing. And those requirements, having a personal God, eliminates Allah, because Allah is not considered personal. He's considered transcendent, but not immanent. And having a transcendent God eliminates the Hindu gods. And so because the Hindu gods are immanent inside this universe, and the universe is just a recycling mode. And so essentially the Christian God, if you take the cosmological argument to the logical outcome, it leads to the Christian God.
Exactly. So let's get back to it, because I think he's getting ready to hang the phone up on him.
Oh, good.
Text alone, whether it's from an eyewitness or a purported eyewitness or somebody who knew an eyewitness, is not sufficient evidence for me and for, I don't know, a court of law or science or pretty much anybody who's not willing to believe anything they read. Text alone is not sufficient. If there were additional evidence that went along with it, that is worth considering. However,
so he says text alone is not sufficient.
This is very important. Matt Dillahunty is admitting that he's an epistivist at this point. An epistivist is someone who doesn't take anything on faith. He only takes things on actual empirical data. There has to be something that he can see with his own two eyes in order to believe in order to believe it. The problem with that is what we talked about earlier. Matt Dillahunty will believe in the multiverse. Matt Dillahunty will believe in the Big Bang. He'll believe that a single cell became a multi-cell. He'll believe in abiogenesis. He'll believe in things like that, things he's never seen before, things that can't be proven in a lab, things that can't be shown to be empirically true. You know what I mean? He has faith on those things, but he's actually admitting right now that he's an epistivist, that he has to have everything in front of him. Actually, I can tell you this for a certainty. I have never seen atom before. I've never seen a neutron, and I've never seen like things that are naked to the human eye. But I believe that those things exist, and I accept it because scientists say that these things exist, and there are literal experiments that you can do to prove that these things exist. right? We can do experiments to prove that life has always came from life and has never came from non-life. But Matt don't want to hear that. Matt is just going to say, you want to know what? Scientists are smart. They're really intelligent people. Therefore, life comes from non-life. You know what I mean? But if we show, okay, SJ has a mom and dad, and they gave birth to her. Her parents has a mom and dad, and they gave birth to your parents. Their parents had a mom and dad, and they gave birth to your grandparents. They had parents, and they gave birth to your great grandparents. And you know how this goes. It's always going to go back to life. We have no evidence whatsoever that life has come from non-life. Yet this is what this man believes, and he's saying that he's an epistovist towards religion or towards Christianity because he won't accept anything on faith. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this, in order for you to believe anything, including what the weatherman is telling you on the news, you have to accept it on faith in the beginning before you can actually take what he's saying into account. Because he's going to tell you on Friday it's going to rain. Okay, you're not going to start to believe that until Thursday gets here. When you start seeing the clouds accumulate, then you know it might rain. We don't know if it's definitely going to rain yet because they've been wrong before. Then you're going to start seeing the clouds get darker. You're going to notice that it's getting darker in the daytime before it starts raining and whatnot, right? You're going to notice that water is coming down. That's going to be your proof that it rained. But there was a lot of elements that had to happen before the rain actually came. And if you're not willing to take a step out on faith, you are setting yourself up for failure. As a matter of fact, this is just a long-winded way for me to say is he's suppressing information, SJ, that would bring him to the knowledge of truth, that would bring him to the conclusion that God exists. And he's doing it on purpose in order to deceive the caller into questioning his own beliefs.
You're right. You're right. And actually, I want to build on what you said, because actually JB in the audience here, and I have been trying to watch the audience questions. If you tag me, I'm more likely to see it. But JB wanted us to define faith. And I would just say that's trust in God. That's at least my definition. What would you say?
A confident trust in God backed by evidence. We can't prove it 100%. You know what I mean? But we can show you reasons on why we believe that Christ rose from the dead. We can show you documents. We can show you eyewitnesses. We can show you all kinds of things. I just wasn't there to actually see it. Now, blind faith, there's another definition of faith, and that's blind faith. And that's when you take something as being true without any proof whatsoever. And that is what Matt Dillahunty is trying to paint the book of Matthew as us accepting a claim with no proof whatsoever. That we're just believing that Matthew wrote it because Matthew said so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of smart people in Christianity.
I don't know any Christians who believe, I mean, at least I shouldn't say I don't know any, it wouldn't even matter if I did, but the idea of believing on blind faith, God calls on us to look for evidence, and he calls on us to test people and test information that people give us to make sure that what we're getting is the truth. It's really important that we focus on the truth and we focus on the evidence. And when people do their due diligence, it does lead to Christianity. It's really pretty awesome. But I want to say something else that Matt Dillahunty said right here. He said that the text, right? So he said that we go to the text. Now, during the ancient Near Eastern times, when the Bible was written, okay, when the Jewish people were known as the people of the book. And the idea of even having a book was something rather unusual. And the Jewish people were very focused on the book. They really cared about scriptures. And then we have this idea of the New Testament coming out. And at this time, when the New Testament came out, about 90% of people apparently were illiterate. So they couldn't even read the New Testament, but somehow the people of the book realized that it's a good idea to put everything down in writing to preserve it. And Jesus, we don't just have a book though. That's what's really cool. Jesus said, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. And here we now have things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nabonidus Cylinder and other cylinders, a lot of evidence that have supported a lot of different things in the New Testament. And so I'm waiting for some more evidence to support the dating of the book of Daniel, but that's a side issue. Because I saw Digital Hammurabi in the chat, and he likes to talk about the book of Daniel. So.
Well, earlier Matt Dillahunty was talking about motives. What is Matt Dillahunty's motive to start the atheist experience? Argue specifically with Christians about whether or not our Bible is actually true or not. Is there a motive behind that? Absolutely, because Matt Dillahunty looks at Christianity as being something horrible, as being a threat to our society, and the only way he can change things is by trying to destroy people's faith, which is why he's trying to get people to question their faith on this show. And I want people to understand that we know this and that we see this. And that's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons me and SJ are doing what we're doing.
Exactly. And we want to, and this is the kind of thing that you and I both have regular day jobs. This is something that I'm doing because I think it's the right thing to do, but it's not, I'm not a full-time atheist, for example, or full-time out there doing this kind of stuff. I admire people who do kind of things full-time, but I'm just saying that you and I are just doing this to make a little time in the day so that we can try to get the good news out.
Exactly. Amen and amen. Let's get back to the video and listen to what Mr. Dillahunty has to say.
Okay, we got less than a minute here, so let's go the whole way through. Let's see what happens.
All right.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you tell me that your name is Tommy, I'm willing to accept that on face value with no other evidence required, because for one thing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your name is Bill or Steve or whatever. It makes no difference to me. If you tell me that you have a pet dragon or a pet dinosaur, that is an extraordinary claim, and I'm going to require more than just your say-so. That's what I'm talking about as a standard of evidence. You put words into my mouth saying that I was willing to dismiss all evidence, and that's not the case. I dismissed a specific type of evidence as insufficient to supporting the claim on its own.
Okay, G-Man.
All right, so can we mute that? Okay, so he said that extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. If he says that his name is Tommy, then you really don't need a whole lot of evidence to prove that that's true then, right? And I guess he's trying to tie that to who wrote the book of Matthew, right? That's not Matthew. The claims that we have about who wrote the book of Matthew are not extraordinary. Again, anybody can go to seminary or actually take time out. Just read your Bible. Go get a study Bible. Most study Bibles will tell you what theologians actually believe about who actually wrote these books. Watch Christian Anarchist. Christian Anarchist is pretty good. And I don't even agree with everything that Christian Anarchist says, but he does a pretty good job with talking about why certain people believe so-and-so wrote this book or so-and-so wrote this book or whatever. You know what I mean? Matt Dillahunty don't know what he's talking about. As far as an extraordinary claim about a dragon or a dinosaur being in your room, please understand this atheist community. It was you who said that our modern day birds are dinosaurs. Please remember that. And actually, I don't know if you ever heard them say this, but a lot of them are claiming that some of our modern day birds are actually considered dinosaurs. You know what I mean? So when they sit there and say that is an extraordinary claim, to say that you got a dinosaur in your backyard, that's not true. I can say I got a dinosaur. Yeah, it's a little lizard. It's about the size of my cat. it's a Hamato dragon or something like that. You know what I mean? No, that's not extraordinary. You know what I mean? What's extraordinary is when somebody says that a singularity expanded over billions of years ago, you know what I mean, and then cooled down and created the universe as we know it without any intelligent cause being involved in it.
Yeah, I think it's an extraordinary claim to say that our DNA just happened to come together in 3.5 billion well-ordered letters, and there's no coder. I think that's extraordinary. I think it's extraordinary. I mean, the whole idea of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. You and I talked about this just before, and you mentioned something about atheism being an extraordinary claim. And I think that
absolutely.
We don't require that atheists provide extraordinary evidence of atheism. It would be probably extraordinary evidence to say God doesn't exist, given all of, I mean, this sounds funny, and Braxton Hunter does this sometimes, but he says this whole idea, when we say, just look outside or look at the trees, they say, oh my gosh, you can't use such a low level argument. But if I look at nature, I mean, nature is amazing, and look at the other planets and the surface of the Mars and surface of Venus and that kind of thing, and look at our world's surface and rainbows and mountains and lakes. And I just honestly don't think I can't imagine not attributing that to a creator. I just, and I'm not trying to, sounds like an argument from ignorance saying, what else could it be? However, if you look out there and you see our planet and you compare it to other planets, I think the best explanation of nature and rainbows and mountains and beaches and all the beauty that we see out there is a beautiful moral lawgiver.
Exactly. I think intelligent design is the strongest argument against the theory of evolution. Again, you can't look at how animals behave and how they're acting. As a matter of fact, actually, one of the extraordinary things about animals is that after they have their babies immediately know where to go to get their milk. Like their parents don't have to teach them that. We have to teach our babies to a certain degree, because we have to actually get the bottle or whatever and put it in their mouth. These babies, when they're born, already know what to do. Some of them know how to walk immediately and was never taught how to do these things. Some of them develop instincts a lot faster than we do. If you ask me, evolution is going in the wrong direction because human beings have to be taught these things in order to survive in our environment. You know what I mean? So there's too many arguments for intelligent design.
There's one more I want to add to what you're just saying that I think is important, is this idea that here's one way that humans are distinctive from other creatures on this planet is we have this moral code. And so when an animal steals food from another animal, or an animal kills another animal, or an animal basically decides that it's going to rape another animal, we don't call it murder, we don't call it rape. Actually, we'd say forcibly copulate. We wouldn't call it theft, because basically it's an animal and they're surviving and they're trying to do these things to survive. They're in survival mode. They don't have this inner conscience that constantly makes you feel guilty. And you notice the funny thing about our conscience, when we do something good, we don't feel guilty for doing something good. We feel good when we do something good. I mean, where did that come from? And when we do something bad, we feel guilty. Where did this crazy guilt come from?
But that's the argument that a lot of them like to make. A lot of them try to say, and I mentioned this last week when you was on my YouTube channel, that they try to argue that morality is subjective. You know what I mean? That it's dependent upon what the individual believes. And there's no such thing as absolute good or absolute evil or absolute right and absolute wrong. That's not true. If I go and steal something, I'm going to try to hide what I did. If I did wrong to somebody, I'm going to try to hide what I did because I believe what I did was absolutely wrong. If these atheists really believed that there was no such thing as absolute right and absolute wrong, they would never hide the evil that they do. All of their cameras would be on. All of them would take responsibility for the things that they say. All of them would just behave any way that they want because morality is subjective. Again, these are just arguments that are made to get a person to doubt their beliefs, in the Christian God or any type of God whatsoever, and try to buy into their worldview. And it's also a picture of their lack of confidence in what they actually argue too, if you ask me. So
yeah, and I want to say Brian Stevens just made a comment. He said dolphins have a moral code. I just wanted to point out, we would expect, a lot of people try to say, we would expect that animals would show some sort of moral morality in a God-given world. So God created the animals as well. I'm switching us up here so I can see you when you talk. But God created the animals as well, and so we would expect that animals, for example, when my dog has an accident inside the house, she walks around feeling very guilty, and so yes, my dog feels guilty. It's not quite the same. She actually unfortunately killed a turtle that was located in my yard, and she didn't feel guilty about that because she was curious, and that's just what she did. It was horrible. I really felt bad for the turtle, but the whole idea is they might show signs of morality, they might show signs of empathy, they definitely show signs of selfishness too. But we would expect that kind of thing in God's planet. I mean, it would be odd if we didn't see animals having some sense of related qualities to what we have.
Exactly. Do you have another video with Matt Dillahunty, or is that the only one we're going to review today?
I think that might be it for today, because I'm noticing we're already at 5:30, and I know are you going to watch the Super Bowl?
Oh, yes, actually, yes, I am. When you come to my YouTube channel, I actually want to review two videos that Matt Dillahunty was involved in. Number one, true empiricism, called the Atheist Experience. And then I want to show you the last call I made to the Atheist Experience. It's really short. It's only about a minute and some change, because he made me the last call, and he did it in a very spiteful way. And I want to show you just how much Matt Dillahunty tried so hard to try to ruin our reputations here on YouTube. Not on YouTube, just in general as being Christians. Actually, I have to ask you something. How do you feel about atheists having this belief? Not all of them, but a lot of them they seem to all have a belief that Christians are stupid, and that we don't study and we don't read and we don't do any research, and we don't know anything. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, considering Dr. William Lane Craig, like, and Robbie Zacharias alone, which shows them really fast that they don't know what they're talking about. Like, what do you think when you hear Christians leaving atheists leaving comments saying that Christians don't really know anything? We need to learn how to reason. We need to learn how to use logic. We don't know anything.
Yeah, well, I just saw, someone in the chat said you and I together have a combined IQ of 80. Sure, sure. Okay. It's one of those things where I think what it is people get bothered when people do show intelligence on this side. So people try to put down a stereotype of Christians. Of course, the 70% of the United States is Christian. Okay. 70% is Christian. So they're basically saying 7 out of 10 people in the United States are stupid. So just making that claim is, I mean, I'm not calling it, but I'm just saying.
Extraordinary.
You try to say 7 out of 10 people in the United States are stupid.
And it's kind of extraordinary too, because they got to prove that.
Yeah, so I just don't think it's a reasonable claim. And I think if people look at people like Francis Collins and Cy Gart and Sarah Salviander and some of the other scientists who are out there, and there are a number of other people who are highly intelligent. And so I don't think it's a very good claim. And I think it's trying to stereotype people unfairly.
And a lot of them don't understand that a lot of the scientists that we have in this country and all around the world, a lot of them are theists. The majority of them are theists. A lot of them are not atheists. They would like to have everybody believe that most scientists are atheists. That's not true. Most of the scientists that we have in our society today are actually theists. So when I say theists, they ain't necessarily Christians, but they do believe that there's something out there greater than we are. As a matter of fact, the more you learn about science, the more you learn about how detailed our cells are, how DNA works and mutations and all that stuff. Once you start really starting to understand these things, you'll have to come to the conclusion that there has to be an intelligent designer or someone greater than us out there. You know what I mean? And if you remove your bias, you'll come to that conclusion a whole lot faster, because the information is plenteous, it's very plentiful, and I'm telling you, it's a smorgasbord of information out there that will bring you to the conclusion that a God must exist. You know what I mean? And there's hardly anything out there that would suggest that he doesn't exist, except for bad arguments that has been obliterated God knows how many different times here on the internet. You know? Yeah,
and you're bringing up, I actually have I collected the stats from the Pew Forum as far as the percentage of people in these different groups, but just to point out, 83% of people, 63% of people are absolutely certain in the United States that they believe in God. So some of them might not believe in the Christian God, but 63% have an absolute certain belief, and another 20% on top of that have a fairly certain belief. So that's 83% of people in the United States have either absolute or fair certainty that there is God. So there's a pretty significant percentage of people out there who have this belief in a higher intelligence.
Amen and amen.
So,
amen and
so
amen.
let's talk about you and I. Okay, I'm gonna actually root for the San Francisco 49ers tonight. Who are you gonna root for?
The 49ers.
Oh, you too? Okay, because the 49ers used to have a lot of Florida State players. So, okay, so that's so you and I are rooting for the same team. So we'll have to see if we win. But I also want to. I wanted to point out something else that so G-Man and I, for the audience, just so you know this, G-Man and I are going to be rotating channels. Next week I'm going to go on G-Man's channel and we're going to review a couple of people, a couple of videos with Atheist Experience. We're going to keep doing the Atheist Experience reviews for a while until we get bored, and then who knows what we'll do. Maybe we'll switch it up and we'll find someone else to go review their videos. Like I'm thinking Aaron Ra needs commentary.
Yeah, I'll definitely put the time in for Aaron Ra. Definitely. I'll definitely put the time in for him, because Aaron Ra, he's the master of making claims without showing any proof for his claims. He's a master of it. No one's better than him at that. So looking forward to definitely. As a matter of fact, I spoke to Aaron Ra, and so did True Empiricism. If you want, next week we can review that video if you want, where myself and True Empiricism debated Aaron Ra for a little bit.
Really? Did you debate him on a channel?
Yes, it was on the Magic Sandwich Show. I think it was episode number 89, I think, where I talked to him a little bit about evolution. And this is when I first talked to him. I was a little intimidated and scared. I tell everybody the story that Aaron Ra had such the reputation at the time that, and I watched so many of his videos talking about science that I was shaking when I went into the Magic Sandwich Show, and I prayed before I went into the show. And then after talking to him, it was like, that's it? That's all you got? And I barely knew anything about evolution at the time. And I did just fine against him, especially with his claims about the Bible. The Bible is a different story. I feel very confident talking about the scriptures. So with anybody. So I want to show you that episode. And if you have, and if you want to see it before we get together, it's episode number 89 of the Magic Sandwich Show, I think.
Yeah, I'll watch it. I'll watch it this week. I'm excited to see it. That'll be fun. And actually, I think, you have one thing I can compliment you on is you've got a very strong knowledge of the scriptures. Like you're able to just pull verses out, and you have a very good memory for a lot of the verses in scriptures. And I think that's actually a great tool to have when you're in a debate, is to be able to reference these scriptures. If people say, I feel like it's in Ephesians, and you're like, oh, it's Ephesians 12. So I think that's great.
Well, God is good, but ultimately I believe that iron sharpens iron, and I think me and you work together, because sometimes when I, like today when I'm reviewing a video, sometimes I'll get like brain dead or whatever, and I can't remember certain things that I want to say. And then I'll say things like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and I'll give like some really weak examples, and then you will come across and say, okay, I think what G-Man's trying to say is Kalan cosmological argument. He's trying to say intelligent design. I'm gonna build on what G-Man said by doing this and doing that. So we work together really well regarding exposing these guys.
I think it's true. And I think, and the thing is the idea is a lot of times the people we're talking about, I don't suspect that they're going to watch our videos and say, oh my gosh, I'm no longer an atheist. I mean, I really doubt Matt Dillahunty is going to watch our video and decide that. But we know that there are a lot of people who are out there and they're curious and they're questioning and they find information on YouTube. A lot of them are not they're not buying the books that you and I have been buying, or they're not doing things like that. They're going to YouTube for their information. And the atheists have had a pretty good control. I would say atheists have there's a lot of atheist channels on YouTube directing people to these views. Rational Wiki, there's all kinds of websites. And so what you and I are doing is sort of unique, because there really aren't that many Christian sites out there going and defending the faith. And I think it's really important that people do that. And anyone in this chat, I know there's a lot of Christians and atheists in the chat right now. And so if anyone is in the chat as a Christian and you want to, or even as an atheist, if you want to come on and chat, I'm more than willing, open, that kind of thing, to, let me know when you'd like to come on. We can schedule something. And as far as Christians, I think I would encourage all of you to get channels. I've got links to a lot of Christian channels and even some atheist channels in my descriptions. So, and go ahead, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to G-Man.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and please subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit the bell if you're not subbed to this channel already. I'm going to be talking about this a lot on my GTV channel as well as on my main channel. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let SJ know that you heard about this channel from G-Man, okay?
Yes.
But it's something I want to say regarding the atheist Christian debate that I think we don't spend enough time talking about. The very first thing that we need to do is make sure that our relationship with Jesus Christ is good, and make sure that we know why we believe the things that we believe, that we know what the Bible says, and we're able to defend it, and we're able to answer people's questions and everything for ourselves, right? Secondly, then you can start going out there and dealing with other people and doing apologetics. But you need to make sure you know why you believe. You need to stand on a solid foundation that nobody's going to be able to come in and mess with your faith. Because it's very easy for Satan to come in here and say, did God really say? Did God really say? Does the Bible really say? You need to be grounded in scripture. Once you're grounded in scripture, these people are not really all that difficult to deal with. They're really not.
Yeah, and I had somebody in the audience just say that logic is going to lead people away from Christianity, but actually I beg to differ. I would say that logic will lead you towards Christianity. If you do your due diligence, and if you start reading, read history, I would actually recommend reading Tom Holland's Dominion and what Christianity's done to really influence positively our civilization. And so I would say, go read this kind of stuff, and then look back at the story of Jesus and ask yourself, why were the apostles so brave? Why were they so willing to die for Jesus? And someone say, well, geez, the Muslims were also really brave when they went into the World Trade Center and did that kind of stuff. But look back at that. The Muslims had not seen the risen Allah. Nobody's seen Allah. And so the apostles were unique in that they had seen the risen Christ. So why did they do that? Why did they go out and they preached for him for decades and they were crucified?
That's an argument for theism. But that's not an argument for atheism. That's an argument to sustain theism. If Muslims also did it, then that means that you can have a strong enough belief in a God that you're willing to do certain things. In order for it to be an atheistic argument, you have to show that atheists have flown an airplane into a building, and they can't show that. So,
yeah, well, no, I mean, going back to the apostles, though, if we say that, why did the apostles do what they did? They were uniquely positioned to have seen the risen Christ, unlike any other suicide or bombers or anybody after that, or anyone who's risked their life for God, or who's gone to the beach. The Coptic Christians in Egypt, for example, were beheaded, and they did not deny Jesus. in those cases. They were told to deny Jesus. They did not deny Jesus. We have a lot of people today who believe, but the issue is back then, 2,000 years ago, these apostles were uniquely positioned because they had actually seen the risen Christ. Someone in the chat was basically saying, did they have evidence? Well, the apostles were doubting. I mean, let's face it, the male apostles, except for John, they weren't even there when Jesus was being crucified. The females were there and John was there, and the other ones were all hiding out. And so why did they decide to suddenly come out and, suddenly over the next few decades risk their lives? And they were actually laughing when they were put in prison. In the book of Acts, it said Peter, and I forget the other one, but Peter was in the prison with somebody, and they were singing and laughing and just so jovial. And you think about that. Now, why were they so happy? It's because they knew that paradise was ahead of them.
Yeah, they also knew all they had to do was get on their knees and pray, and God was going to set them free. You know what I mean? If God didn't want them in that situation, they wouldn't have been in it to begin with. You know what I mean? I love the example that you use when you talk about their bravery, because I tell people the story a lot. Before I became a Christian, I wasn't a debater, and I would never go out there and deal with the Hebrew Israelites the way I do. It's not until I became a believer and I got that conviction from the Lord. So listen, this is what you need to do. You know what I mean? This is your calling. This is what you need to do. And I'm going to do it. And I don't care what they do to me. I'm still going to do it. You know what I mean? And that comes from the power of the Holy Spirit. And you atheists are never going to fully understand that until you take a step out on faith and investigate these things.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The power of the Holy Spirit and the fearlessness that a lot of the people have. I think just if I could have a tenth of the kind of fearlessness that they had, I think I'd be pretty set for life. It's truly amazing. So, well, listen, everybody, I want to say thank you for everybody for coming in here. And we really enjoyed it. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, the Super Bowl usually starts about 6:30 Eastern. So it's going to start in less than an hour. So G-Man and I are rooting for the San Francisco 49ers. They're playing Kansas City.
That's right.
And I guess I don't even care if Kansas City wins, but I kind of want San Francisco to win. So, and G-Man has got red on for San Francisco 49ers. It has been a long time. So.
Yeah. I'm in a different room that doesn't have any light. I'm using the light on my phone. But as soon as I end this show, I'm going to go back in the room with my light and everything. So it's all good.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. I want to say thank you for coming in, and please like and subscribe and go over to G-Man's channel. We're going to be there next week at 4:00, same time, same place. So please tune in next week. All right.
That's right. And bye-bye. Subscribe or else.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.